chance to air your question or comment. We're glad you were watching, and we certainly want you to stay tuned to CNN. We'll always have the latest developments for you on America's new war coming up right now.
Investigators in the United States claim progress, the discovery of clues from the cockpits, and one significant arrest. All the while, exhausted workers at Ground Zero in New York get a boost from the president turned motivator-in-chief.
And in moments of silence, in moments of song, the world takes time to remember.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jim Clancy.
And I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America's new war. We've got a couple of late developments to tell you about right now in the ongoing investigation into the terrorist attacks against the United States. Search crews have recovered the cockpit voice recorder from the hijacked United Airlines flight that crashed in Pennsylvania on Tuesday. Authorities are hoping that the device will shed some light on what happened in the moments just before the crash. The recorder is said to be in, quote, fairly good shape. And in another development as well, authorities made their first arrest in direct connection to the terrorist attacks. The Justice Department says the man is a material witness in the case. Well, it has been nearly 4 days since the attacks now, and around-the-clock rescue operations have continued despite some rainy weather Friday. You're looking at a live shot of the scene in New York right there. Workers still digging through that mountain of destruction. They say they're hoping for miracles. And for the rescue workers, the continued operations are physically draining, as you can imagine. And on Friday, rescuers in New York got a huge morale boost and a bit of a break from U.S. President George W. Bush. Mr. Bush got a first-hand look out as well at the devastation, and afterwards thanked the rescuers for all their efforts.
I'm shocked at the size of the devastation. And it's hard to describe what it's like to see the gnarled steel and broken glass and twists the building silhouetted against smoke. I said that this was the first act of war on America in the 21st century, and I was right, particularly having seen the scene.
Friday, also a day of prayer and remembrance. 4 former American presidents joined Mr. Bush in prayer at the National Cathedral. Similar scenes of prayer and candlelight vigils were played out across the country and around the world all throughout the day.
Well, let's take a look now at the rapidly moving investigation. The FBI saying it now has 36,000 leads in this case. At least 27 people have been detained by the U.S. Immigration Service. And within the past few hours, the first arrest. CNN Justice correspondent Kelly Arena following that story.
The first arrest has been made in direct connection to Tuesday's terrorist attacks, that according to law enforcement officials. Now, an individual that was detained at JFK Airport in New York is in custody on a material witness warrant. Now, we don't have any more specifics at this point, but a material witness warrant is issued when it can be demonstrated that there is information that's highly relevant to a criminal investigation and when there is a risk of flight. Law enforcement sources say to expect much more such arrests in coming days. Now, sources say that at least 2 people in custody have provided what they describe as very useful and helpful information in moving this investigation forward. The FBI says that it has issued 35 search warrants, hundreds of subpoenas. It has seized computers and other material, and it's following up thousands of leads both in the U.S. and abroad. Sources also say that there are currently 27 individuals in custody on immigration violations who may or may not know anything about the incidents. Investigators have also put out a so-called watch list informing various authorities, including Border Patrol and the FAA, about 150 individuals the FBI says may have information that could be helpful in the investigation. Now, if those people are found, they will be detained for questioning.
A senior defense official has told CNN 2 of the names of suspected hijackers match the names of people who attended U.S. military schools. Now, the schools are the Defense Language Academy at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas and the Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama. Pentagon officials caution the matching names could be just a coincidence. CNN national correspondent Mike Betcher has the details of what else investigators are learning about the moments that were leading up to the attacks.
4,000 special agents chasing 36,000 leads and circulating to 18,000 law enforcement agencies a growing list of people they want to question.
The Federal Bureau of Investigation has also forwarded a list of more than 100 names to numerous law enforcement organizations. These are the names of individuals the FBI would like to talk to, because we believe they may have information that could be helpful to the investigation.
Another FBI list, this one made public. The 19 men who the FBI says were the hijackers of the 4 aircraft. 7 of the men were pilots, according to CNN terrorism analyst Peter Bergen. 13 of them have recognizable Saudi tribal names from the west and southwest of Saudi Arabia, an area where bin Laden has recruited.
According to a source familiar with the bin Laden organization, men returning from Afghanistan who had trained with bin Laden arrived in Saudi Arabia in recent weeks and were talking about some kind of big operation that was imminent.
The FBI searched this apartment in San Diego, where in those final stages, Monday before the attack, 3 men left town in a hurry.
They had the truck right here that was moving out. Did that seem like you were leaving anywhere? I mean, I never seen nobody move at midnight.
The trail of another accused hijacker, Mohammed Atta, in the months before the attack, led from Hamburg, Germany, to Florida and a series of flight schools, rental car agencies, and apartments. Then back to Hamburg, a return to Florida, and a final trip to New England, where he boarded a Boston to Los Angeles flight that eventually crashed into the World Trade Center. U.S. intelligence sources tell CNN the entire terrorist operation required so many people and special skills that they believe several terrorist groups had to be involved. Egyptian Islamic Jihad, led by this man, Ayman Zawahiri, a close bin Laden associate, is one of the groups getting close scrutiny by U.S. analysts. They were photographed together about 3 years ago in Afghanistan. A second man who has not been seen in more than 20 years is also being scrutinized. Imad Mughniya, who is suspected by U.S. officials of masterminding a string of terrorism attacks against Americans, including the 1983 suicide bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut that killed 241, has had numerous contacts with bin Laden since 1994, including face-to-face contact in the Sudan at an Islamic conference. This, according to Western and Mideast intelligence sources. A founding member of Lebanese Hezbollah, Mughniya is believed living in Iran. U.S. officials remain convinced that bin Laden was behind Tuesday's attack, but believe the day's mega-terrorism marked the debut of a new, larger, and more dangerous organization, a group with many heads and many faces. Mike Betcher, CNN, Atlanta.
On Friday, President Bush led a day of prayer at the National Cathedral in Washington. Mr. Bush then traveled to New York City, touring the wreckage that was the World Trade Center. CNN senior White House correspondent John King recaps the president's emotional day and looks at some of the tough decisions that are still ahead of him.
A first-hand look at the worst of the devastation and a pep talk that included a promise to those pulling the dead from the rubble.
I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
After his emotional tour of New York, Mr. Bush was asked if he knew who was responsible.
We know we got a suspect.
But lead suspect Osama bin Laden is an elusive target, and aides say one of the president's greatest challenges is convincing an angry nation to be patient.
This conflict was begun on the timing and terms of others. It will end in a way and at an hour of our choosing.
Mr. Bush declared a national emergency and authorized a call-up of the National Guard and reservists. And Congress passed a resolution authorizing the president to use all necessary and appropriate force to retaliate. Senior officials say they do not rule out a first wave of military strikes in the near future. But Mr. Bush is asking his national security team and other world leaders to develop a long-range plan. For example, sources tell CNN the president is asking the leaders of Canada, France, Germany, Britain, and other nations to do more to break up terrorist cells in their countries, and asking Saudi Arabia and other moderate Arab nations to crack down on bin Laden's financial supporters and to take a tougher line with the Taliban in Afghanistan.
In our response, we will have to take into account not only the perpetrators, but those who provide haven, support, inspiration, financial, and other assets to the perpetrators.
Mr. Bush also led the nation in a day of prayer and remembrance, with former presidents, the cabinet, and the Congress joining in.
Grief and tragedy and hatred are only for a time. Goodness, remembrance, and love have no end. And the Lord of life holds all who die and all who mourn.
Consoling the nation is another role for a president at times of crisis, and a father who knows the strains of the job well gave his son a supportive tap.
Administration sources say weekend national security meetings will focus on options for responding, and senior officials tell CNN they enter those talks with one encouraging development. Pakistan, which borders Afghanistan, has now promised to fully cooperate in any U.S. operations. John King, CNN, the White House.
Well, the U.S. Congress has taken quick action on a number of issues arising out of all of this. Some of that action actually just a short time ago. So let's turn now to CNN's Major Garrett in Washington for the very latest. Major?
Well, Colleen, the United States Congress, House of Representatives, and the Senate today passed nearly unanimously. It was unanimously in the Senate, only one no vote in the House of Representatives, resolutions authorizing the use of force, giving the president full legal authority to prosecute any military campaign against those thought to be responsible and found to be responsible for the terrorist attacks on September 11th. In the negotiations with Congress, the Bush White House had pressed for wider authority to deal with and to obtain that legal authority to prosecute any war against future attacks against the United States of a terrorist nature. Congress decided not to give the president that wide authority. What they wanted to do was maintain their congressional prerogatives to maintain a legal authority declaration only for those thought responsible for the attacks on September 11th, telling the White House, if there are more attacks and you need more authority, come back and we'll talk to you about that then. Colleen?
And what does that say, Major, about the process here?
Well, what it says is that Congress, even at a time of national crisis such as this, wants to maintain its prerogatives outlined in the Constitution. The President, as Commander-in-Chief, of course, has the legal authority to prosecute a war, but only with congressional approval. The Congress has been very aggressive in protecting that constitutional prerogative, and was so in this case. There was a good deal of a back-and-forth negotiating between the White House and Congress over the exact wording of this use of force resolution. As I said, the White House wanted broader authority. Congress said, no, we will give you full authority to use whatever military means you deem necessary to deal with those who perpetrated the attacks on September 11th. If, in fact, there are additional attacks, we'll discuss and provide you the authority to deal with those, but we do not want to give you the power to anticipate those types of attacks and use authority we're not prepared yet to grant you.
Understood. CNN's Major Garrett in Washington for us. Thanks. Jim?
Well, Colleen, back in New York, the images coming in continue to increase the sense of surrealism around the site of this attack. These latest pictures were shot Friday by an amateur photographer. Now, he was led through the area near the World Trade Center.
Everyone just grabbed their kids and ran. Left their goddamn carriages.
Crews are working all around this area, taking a look at what is going on there, trying to find, of course, any survivors. Residents are there still struggling to comprehend what happened in downtown Manhattan. Well, CNN's Garrick Utley is in New York. He is joining us once again now with a view from there. Garrick.
Thank you, Jim, and also joining you with a question about vocabulary, about the words we use in our life. And the question is, what is the most attention-grabbing three-letter word in the English language? Well, many people will say, obviously, it's sex, but we're not talking about sex right now because the close runner-up is no doubt war, W-A-R. This word war is in the air all the time right now in our broadcasts, in Congress, the president's visit to New York today. The reservists are being mobilized, tens of thousands of them. Congress has passed a resolution authorizing President Bush to take whatever needed action he deems fit. But what is this war going to really be?
For a president who would lead a new war, what happened here was more important than any congressional resolution. The voice of the people giving George W. Bush a mandate to do whatever is necessary to avenge what happened here.
I can hear you!
No leader can take a nation into war without the backing of its citizens. That backing is there. Still, a CNN Time poll released Thursday shows the dilemma facing the president and the people. When asked whether Congress should declare war, 62% said yes. But then, when asked against whom Congress should declare war, 61% said they weren't sure. That uncertainty gives President Bush flexibility and time to determine what kind of a war he intends to wage. The obvious victory in this war would be to capture or kill Osama bin Laden. Of those asked in the CNN Time poll, 81% said they supported the assassination of terrorist leaders. But bin Laden is a moving, hidden target, as was seen following the involvement of his terrorist organization in the bombing of 2 American embassies in East Africa 3 years ago. Cruise missiles were duly launched against terrorist camps in Afghanistan. They hit their targets, but not bin Laden, which raises the prospect that what may start as a war against Osama bin Laden will evolve into something similar to the war on drugs. As with terrorism, it's not a war against a country, but rather a fight against shadowy individuals and their networks. The United States sends financial support and agents to South America to fight drugs at their source. It tries to guard its borders at home. Occasionally, a leader of a drug cartel is captured and extradited to the United States. Still, it is a war with neither victory nor defeat. It just goes on. In the wake and grief of Tuesday's trauma, it is too early to see clearly where, when, and how this war will be fought. That decision is up to the president, backed by the nation, to choose not only the time and place of the next battle, but also the weapons.
Those weapons, no doubt, will include guns, cruise missiles, airplanes, but also the latest technology to intercept communications among terrorist groups, intercept their phone calls. They love to use cell phones, for example. There'll be the weapons of economic sanctions to be imposed against those countries which have supported or at least shelter terrorists like bin Laden. Also the weapons of diplomacy to create alliances and coalitions to put political pressures on these nations. It all adds up to a very large arsenal. And the question, of course, is when will it be used and how will the weapons of this arsenal be used? Jim?
What is your sense there, Garrick, of the patience that the president talked about, of choosing the time and the place to act?
Obviously, I think a lot of slack is going to be cut by the American public. They know the president is now committed himself to really carry out what public opinion wants. We want action here in the United States. The polls show that quite clearly. But there's a very interesting and very delicate balancing act. On the one hand, as we said, the president has to have the support of the people. He has that. At the same time, that support can put pressure on the president to act before he is ready to do so. So my guess, it's only a gut feeling, I think other people who have been studying the situation might share this, we're probably talking about a few weeks, perhaps a month or so at the most, before some kind of initial sharp action is taken, probably using military weapons themselves. But then this war is going to perhaps become a longer campaign, the long slog that may never end in a victory or a defeat. It will simply go on. Jim?
All right, Garrick Utley there in New York, and we'll be back with Garrick a little bit later. Here is an update now on some of the latest developments. A man has been arrested in New York in connection with Tuesday's attacks. This is the first arrest directly connected to the ongoing investigation. The Justice Department saying the man is a material witness in the case. In Pennsylvania, search crews recover the cockpit voice recorder from the hijacked United Airlines flight. Authorities are hoping it will reveal key details about the plane crash. The recorder is said to be, in the words of one official, fairly good shape. U.S. President George W. Bush thanked rescuers in New York for their continued efforts. Mr. Bush got a first-hand look at the destruction for himself on Friday. Rescuers have been working non-stop since the attacks. About 4,700 people are still believed to be missing since the World Trade Center collapsed.
And across America and overseas, Friday was a day of mourning. CNN's Bruce Morton has more on our collective grief.
Church services everywhere. America's leadership was at Washington's National Cathedral, but services everywhere. Cleveland, Ohio.
We mourn for the many lives lost in a tragedy that remains etched in our minds forever.
Boston, Massachusetts.
Look with compassion on the whole human family, and especially on those who lost their lives this week.
Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer.
At the Pentagon, where many lost fellow workers and friends.
May God comfort all of you that are in loss today, and may we wait on Him and renew our strength.
Manchester, New Hampshire. An Islamic service in Sterling, Virginia, near Dulles Airport.
When people accuse you of being terrorists, this is because this is what they were told.
Austin, Texas.
Banish the violence that has been in our midst and the evil that exists around us.
Back at Washington's National Cathedral, the Commander-in-Chief.
This conflict was begun on the timing and terms of others. It will end in a way and at an hour of our choosing.
That service ended with a hymn, a battle hymn. Bruce Morton, CNN, Washington.
Stand by. And you know, we keep hearing accounts of acts of bravery, acts of astounding bravery in some cases. On Friday, our Larry King spoke to U.S. Solicitor General Ted Olson about the loss of his wife, Barbara. She was on board the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. She made 2 telephone calls to her husband.
I think she must have been partially in shock from the fact that she was on a hijacked plane. She absorbed the information. We then both reassured one another this plane was still up in the air, this plane was still flying, and this was going to come out okay. I told her it's going to come out okay. She told me it was going to come out okay. She said, "I love you."
And he says that at one point Barbara asked him what she should tell the pilot of the doomed plane to do. Olson was a 45-year-old lawyer who often appeared on CNN and other networks as a commentator, known for her conservative views and her big heart. Well, Larry King also spoke to Michael Hingson, a blind man who worked on the 78th floor of the first World Trade Center tower that was hit. He paid tribute to his guide dog, Roselle, for saving his life.
She did a tremendous job. She's from Guide Dogs for the Blind, which is one of the larger schools in the country that trains these dogs. They do an incredible job of selecting the animals, doing the best that they can to acclimatize them to a lot of adverse conditions. This clearly can't be one of them, but she knows how to cope with noises. She knows how to cope with a lot of different stressful things. So she played guide down the stairs.
She did on that day. Hinkson and his dog actually escaped through the lobby, and then they took shelter in a subway just as that building started to collapse. Jim?
If you're in a military family at this time, if you are in the military reserves in the United States, there is a lot of discussion underway right now about the U.S. Defense Department and its decision to call up tens of thousands of reservists. Let's get more on that by going to the Pentagon, where our Mark Potter is standing by. Mark?
Well, Jim, as that reserve call-up is being put into place, workers here at the Pentagon building itself are still out there tonight, as they have been for several nights, working under floodlights in the rubble, going through the debris, looking for the remains of victims, trying to shore up the building, looking for evidence that can be used by the FBI as it tries to build its case. The toll now, the estimated death toll here is 189 people, including the 64 who died on the plane that hit the building on Tuesday. Officials say a third of the Pentagon has been knocked out of commission by the blast, the fire, the smoke, and the water damage. And what we are seeing here are some pictures that were shot earlier in the day of the damage, the very extensive damage to this building. Officials here say the repair to this building could take years, the cost anywhere between $100 million and $1 billion. And some of the people working on the scene have been talking about what they have been seeing in there, and it's been quite disturbing.
Think of your worst nightmare of a building that's been pummeled, just complete destruction. Everything's just knocked down, torn apart, ripped up. The casualties are in there. It's pretty much the worst thing you can imagine to see.
Now, the Pentagon says it will soon activate some 35,000 reservists to help shore up defenses at the nation's ports and also to assist the fighter pilots who have been flying combat air patrols or who have been on standby at 26 bases around the country. The reservists will be called up from their civilian jobs, and among those who will be called, we are told, will be engineers, doctors, military police, air defense, and intelligence specialists. Now, at a news briefing earlier, the Army Secretary said that after the terrorist attack, Americans emerged from that experience stronger and with a greater resolve to fight back.
Tuesday, September the 11th, has already been described in various newspapers and publications as the darkest day in American history. I would only say to our adversaries that I would warn to watch carefully, for you are about to see our finest hour in the future.
Now, Pentagon sources say on the day of the terrorist attacks, at least 4 Air Force jets scrambled to try to intercept some of the hijacked passenger jets that crashed into the World Trade Center and into the Pentagon. But we were told that the jets just never got there on time. Air Force officials say there was never any discussion about actually shooting down those civilian jetliners. Again, they pointed out that the fighter jets were never in close enough proximity to actually do that. Jim, back to you.
All right, Mark Potter, the latest there from the Pentagon. Well, Washington is seeking international help, of course, as it considers how best to retaliate for Tuesday's terrorist attacks. In particular, the U.S. government focusing on Islamic nations with links to the prime suspect, Osama bin Laden. We get more on that now from Andrea Koppel.
If, as the U.S. suggests, Osama bin Laden was the mastermind behind Tuesday's attacks, going after him and shutting down his al-Qaeda terrorist network will require more than just a military assault on Afghanistan. That's because over the years, al-Qaeda has become an international network with cells rooted in almost every region of the world. That's why Secretary of State Colin Powell has put the world on notice. The United States needs help.
I am not threatening so much as I am saying this has become a new benchmark, a new way of measuring the relationship and what we can do together in the future.
Since Tuesday, Powell has had the world on speed dial, in particular reaching out to countries where the U.S. says Islamic militant groups have links to bin Laden's network.
Once these people have been trained in Afghanistan, we know that they've gone to Africa, we know that they've gone to Asia, we